Hello, everyone. It is 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. If you are not muted, could you please go ahead and mute yourself? You should have been muted upon entry. And we're just going to ask that you would stay muted for the majority of the meeting in order to eliminate background noise. Once the webinar is over, we're going to open up the floor for questions. And at that time, you can unmute yourself to ask questions. You can always use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions through that, and I'll read them to John. So thank you for being here. Today's webinar is going to focus on how to stay safe and keep your drivers safe during the winter months. We're in January, so we still probably have 3 hard months ahead of us, hopefully only 2 since we're at the end. But we've all had experiences where a car has maybe slipped a little bit out there on the roads when it's snowing or icy. And as scary as that is for both ourselves and the drivers around us, if it's a 26,000 pound vehicle or higher, it's a lot scarier. So at AIM, we are very safety focused. It's the number one important thing to us as a company. So we just want to be able to share our knowledge and our best practices for staying safe with all of you out there. And it's not only the snow and the ice, but also, sometimes the bitter cold can really negatively impact drivers, and we want to make sure that they're safe while they're out there. Before I get started, I'd just like to take a moment to tell you about both AIM and the purpose of these webinars. Oops. Sorry about that. So the purpose of these webinars, for those of you that aren't familiar with us, is to just use our internal knowledge, all of our resources, to share our knowledge with you. We have some of the brightest and best resources in the transportation industry available to us. So we would like to share those with our customers and anyone who is affected by transportation. AIM Transportation Solutions is a company that offers a variety of transportation related business solutions. Those include full service leasing, commercial rentals, maintenance programs, dedicated contract carriage, and the list goes on. We also provide the sale of used vehicles after they come off of lease. So like I said, we have many, many bright stars among us, and one of the brightest is hosting today. That's Mr. John Rugarber. John, who has worked with AIM for over 18 years, is the director of safety and is also involved with our training program. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And so John has been involved with mentoring our drivers and developing and implementing proper safety practice meetings for our customers and national lease affiliates alike. John is a certified Smith System instructor and just an all-around expert in the field of safety. John's involved with our CDL apprenticeship program as a training administrator, and he conducts safety training programs for the entire company. So John is definitely the right person to talk to when it comes to safe winter driving. With that being said, John, the floor is yours.
There you go. Thank you very much for the introduction, Jess. I want to welcome everybody to the webinar series that we offer. I think we're doing it about once a month or whenever the opportunity arises. Today's series is going to be on winter weather preparation. I trust that you can all see the PowerPoint that's up in front of you. Probably in the summertime, I'll put 2 sunshiny big globes there on the side of the webinar series. But today we're dealing with the winter weather, snow and ice and slush. So I'm not sure where this is going. It could be all around the country. So there may be some people in nice warm weather and other people that are suffering the wrath of winter. So we could start, we're going to talk about a number of, basically 4 categories, and I'm going to go through them. There's going to be a section for comments and questions at the end if you have any particular questions you'd like to ask. So let's get started. All right, so an overview of what we're going to talk about today are basically the 4 general categories: winter weather hazards, preparing for adverse weather conditions. And, we want to try to cover 3 of those areas: mentally, physically, and operationally. Some defensive driving awareness and injury prevention, which is a huge factor in the winter months. And it goes throughout the year, but in winter, A lot of slip and fall injuries, workers' comp claims associated with that. So that's kind of what we're going to cover as we move forward here. Just some real quick statistics. Under a 10-year annual average, so that'd be running from 2007 through 2016. On an annual basis, there are 562,182 crashes, and they occurred on snow, sleet, slushy, and/or icy roadway conditions. 138,735 people were injured in these crashes, and disappointingly, 1,705 were killed due to these events. So people do suffer loss of life in these. The injuries alone are reason to avoid these, but we definitely don't want to see anybody get killed or injured if we can help it. Little thing I found when I was researching some info for this webinar, I wasn't even aware actually that over 70% of the nation's roads are located in snowy regions, which receive more than 5 inches. And if anybody's from Canada, I'm sure you know what that 13 centimeters is. So basically 5 inches is average snowfall annually. Nearly 70% of the US population lives in these snowy regions. So I guess the other 30% are relatively lucky. We can either be in Phoenix or Florida or Southern California. So some of the problems with snow, it reduces the pavement friction and vehicle maneuverability, causing slower speeds, reduced roadway capacity, and increased crash risk. The average arterial, and those are secondary type of roads, residential roads, 2-lane roadways. Generally, the speeds decline by 30 to 40% on snowy or slushy pavements. And at highway speeds on the interstates, their speeds can be almost reduced anywhere from 3 to 13% in light snow, and by 5 to 40% in heavy snow. So it's no surprise that if you need to be at work at 8 o'clock on a snowy day, you may want to leave a little bit early because it's going to take you that much longer to get there. Heavy snow and sleet can also reduce visibility. Lanes and roads are obstructed by snow accumulation, which reduces the capacity. So that 4-lane interstate that you used to be able to travel pretty easily has now been reduced to 2 lanes due to snow buildup on the sides or things of that nature. And correspondingly, that increases your travel time. So I guess it would be no surprise that the #1 reason for winter-related accidents is driving too fast for conditions. Something that I strive to teach our drivers is that you should always be practicing for worst-case scenarios. You know, you can drive a certain speed when the road is dry, the weather is warm, but if you continue those speeds in a snowy condition or an icy condition, obviously that is a recipe for disaster. So driving too fast for conditions, as common as it may seem that you would want to slow down, most people don't slow down enough. And that is the #1 reason. Now, there are some secondary contributing reasons, not the least of which is not allowing for a safe following distance. So again, going through the course of the day, if you don't practice your safe following distance when you have the chance and when it's nice, warm, good traction on the roadway, you're not normally going to change your habits when the roads become slick and slippery. Something you may want to stress to your drivers, to practice when things are good. Don't try to practice when the proverbial snow hits the fan. That would not be the time to start getting it together. Also, not anticipating a loss of traction when stopping. How many people, we probably all been surprised at one time or another. You go to apply the brakes and you feel a little bit of slipping and sliding. I would hope to think that most times we can stop safely, but there are times that could cause a problem. And then not adjusting to low visibility conditions. The addition of snow, fog, whiteouts, all contribute to not being able to see as far as you would normally see when you're driving. So you'd have to be aware of these particular situations. And that goes without saying it. I mean, if you got foggy conditions, California is known for fog coming in off the ocean. There's parts in the Northeast, the larger mountains, when you're coming down into the valleys. So low visibility is another concern. So let's talk about some of the hazards that are associated with that. I just got done mentioning reduced visibility. Snow, ice, and moisture on the windows. I'm talking about the windows of your vehicle. Another big reason why you want to check your defroster. You want to make sure your defroster is working, that all the vents are clear. Part of our pre-trip inspection for commercial motor vehicles is to make sure that the defroster works. I have personally been inspected twice in my career, and both those times the officer put his hand over top of the defroster to make sure that it was working. I've been DOT'd more than twice, but those 2 times he chose to check my defroster. Wet or slippery roads, I talked about that a second ago. Rapidly changing conditions. That could apply to anything. Snow, the snow coming in off of Lake Erie. Anybody who travels up in the upper Midwest, Cleveland, Chicago, Indiana, you come to Erie, PA, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, running I-90 across eastbound. Conditions change all the time. And if we watch the news, inevitably there's a number of chain reaction collisions because of that. Unfamiliar braking performance. I'm sure that if I were to get in your vehicles with you, you would pretty much know how your brakes perform regularly. What we're talking about is how when you brake and now you've been on a patch of ice or you're in snow, that vehicle is going to perform differently than it normally performs. 4 wheels down on the road with a car, a little easier to control. You start to get a little squirrely with your tractor. You get in the habit of hitting your brakes at the slightest inclination. Next thing you know, a straight line becomes a jackknife situation in a tractor trailer. So another thing that I talk to our drivers about is not always going to the brake. The brake is not always the solution. Ironically, if you're looking far enough ahead and you're preparing, you wouldn't have to hit the brakes that hard. So it's kind of a mindset change that you really need to try to get across to your fleet, to think that way versus always using that brake as a safety valve. Probably not the best approach. And then probably, this may have been number 1. I probably could have moved this to number 1 easily. Other motorists. We watch all day long at how poorly people drive. We may look at them and think that we don't drive like that. Hopefully we won't want to. But there are times that we've probably been caught in that situation. But if you look at other motorists, it's very easy to tell what they're going to do a lot of times. The movement of the front tires, the turn left or right will give you an indication that they may be coming over. They may be hitting the brakes repeatedly over and over again. It's only a matter of time before they hit the brakes too hard, possibly, and then they spin out in front of you. You want to look in your mirrors. Keep an eye on the people coming up on your sides and on the back. Things can happen from that area too. So it's an all-around job. It's 24/7 and it's 360 degrees. We want to be aware of everything around us. So let's take a minute and talk about driver preparation, preparing the driver himself for the job. I've chosen a couple of pictures here. The one in the middle at the top, I'm not sure what that gentleman, he's probably a little frustrated. I would think that he's quite frustrated at something. The gentleman to your left on the screen, that's a happy truck driver right there. That's preferably the way we would like to see our fleet be. Every guy come in at the end of the day, the beginning of the day with a big smile on his face, wants to do the job. That's the kind of guy we're looking for. Now I am looking for the guy on the right-hand side too, although I must have missed the memo for this one because I'm not sure when Happy National Truck Appreciation Week is. So my email and my phone number will be at the bottom. If anyone watching this wants to let me know when that occurs, I'd be more than happy to listen. But he's a happy guy too, and that's the kind of guy we want working for us. The gentleman down on the left, I think he's an actor, and I'm not sure what movie that came from. So we could have an extra bonus point question there at the end. Couple things going on with him. He could be scared to death. He's not quite sure what's going on, and he's not quite sure why he's even driving a truck. But we don't necessarily want to have our drivers having that particular look on their face. And then the gentleman to the lower right-hand corner. That's the one we all know and love. We see him on a daily basis. Anytime we're on the road, there's always somebody that is angry at something. And hopefully they're not us. But that is not the type of driver we want in our fleet. The gentleman to the lower left, we can train him up and make him the best driver we can make him, but the gentleman on the right, that's a difficult one to change. So just a couple examples of different types of drivers. So that being said, now that we're talking about drivers, now these aren't questions that necessarily you will ask them as a dispatcher or from a managerial level, but you'd want to hope that the driver himself will say, hey, have I gotten enough or the proper amount of sleep last night? Am I prepared for the weather today? I was watching the news. I know it's going to be a long day. I know it's going to be snowy. I want to mentally prepare. Can I mentally adapt for unexpected circumstances? Everything's going to be slower. Things are going to change. Your lift gate may not work. Your back door may not open. Your airlines may crack. There's many different situations that occur as soon as the cold weather kicks in, and you want to try to have your driver mentally be able to adapt to those particular circumstances. Reevaluate your normal daily habits. What I meant by that is kind of looking at, I mentioned earlier, going to the brake all the time. Lane changes. In a tractor trailer, you want to try to make a smooth transition on the lane change. Slow, smooth, and steady. Triples and double drivers, they tend to do that quite well because they can't afford to make a mistake. If you make quick, erratic lane changes when it's icy or snowy, your chances of spinning out would rise. Again, you're going to the brake all the time. Now you hit a patch of ice, you go to the brake, and now you're doing 360s in the middle of the interstate. So probably not a good spot to be in. Expect the unexpected. Again, that's a given. Anything could happen at any time. For every mile, for every foot that a driver travels on the roadway, there will never be the same foot in his career. Every single foot that you travel on the roadway changes as soon as you go past it. So you should always be ready for the unexpected. And then the last item, recommend to your drivers or your fleet as a whole to bring along a to-go bag. You never know when you're going to be broken down. You may have to spend a couple hours in the truck. Take one of the thermal blankets, keep that with you in the event that the truck will not run and you now have lost your heat. Temperatures can become quite low to the point of life-threatening if you're not careful. So, extra food, underwear, t-shirts, socks, couple sweaters maybe, or an extra sweater, some gloves, a warm hat, things of that nature could go in this bag, along with some food, snacks, chocolate bars. You never know when things are going to happen. So can't hurt to bring along a to-go bag or recommend that to your fleet. All right, so operationally, we're looking at these things again. It's a given that you're going to do these 3 items through the course of your day, whether it's sunny, whether it's raining, or whether it's snowing. So the pre-trip inspection is our first inspection of the day, mandated under 396.13. Basically, that gives you the chance to address any issues prior to leaving. And I'll get into some more specific items in the next couple slides. The en route inspection, I actually put a little yellow comment box on this because there's going to be a picture coming up of a tanker where an en route inspection would have been a very good thing for this gentleman to have done. And you'll be able to see as well as I that it was not done properly. So those are addressing issues that you would see during the course of your trip. And some of the criteria for that is he wants to assure himself of the proper securement if there's a flatbed type situation. You are supposed to inspect within the first 50 miles and then re-examine when you're changing your duty status, or you've driven for 3 hours or traveled 150 miles. Some of the criteria for the en route. And the post-trip inspection is generally a walk around at the end of the day. Doesn't have to be as detailed as the pre-trip inspection, but it does give you a chance to get things repaired before the next day. Nothing worse than showing up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's 5 degrees outside and something isn't working that could have easily been fixed the day before. So that is a big bonus of the post-trip inspections. The driver vehicle inspection reports need to be filled out, although a regulation was put in a couple years ago where If there are no violations on your post-trip, the DVIR does not have to be filled out. So something to keep in the back of your mind on that one. Okay, so let's cover the pre-trip inspection first. I was able to be lucky enough, I guess, to grab a picture of one of our vehicles, and that's in Dunkirk, New York, and you can see right to the lower right-hand corner, it was taken November 19th of 14, that picture. Thought it was a good picture of how bad a truck can get covered in snow. You would want to, clean off the tires, clean off the frame rails, make sure that the fifth wheel is clean. You do not want to hook a tractor up to a trailer with snow like that on a fifth wheel. A lot of guys will just try to use that as a plow, as the trailer to push that snow. Not a good idea. That fifth wheel won't get locked in, and there's a great chance that you could drop that trailer when you go to pull away. So that's a great example of a vehicle that you definitely want to get cleaned off before you get started to go. So some of the things you want to check your lights, flashers, your high beams, tires. You want to have at least 4/32 seconds of tread wear on the front steer tires and at least 2/32 seconds on the driver trailer. I would recommend, I don't know specifically, that is the lowest you can go for DOT criteria. In the snowy regions of the country, you definitely want to have more. If you have a single axle tractor, it becomes even more important to have a little bit deeper tread on both your trailer drives and your steer tires. Check your windshield wiper blades. I know they do make a couple of different types, winter blades. Keep an eye on those if you need to have those replaced. I'm pretty sure with our national lease accounts, wiper blades, there's twice a year we do wiper blades, although we'd be more than happy to replace them if you were to need them earlier than that. Windshield washer fluid, it is a regulation to have windshield washer fluid in the container. We have been DOT'd. I have the privilege, I guess you could call it, of having a DOT report that our driver did not make sure his windshield washer was full. So that could become a problem as you're going through a snowstorm trying to clean the snow off the windshield, and now all you're doing is smearing it. So you want to check your coolant. Make sure you have the proper level. The quality, I know when we do the national lease, we put in the proper quality coolant, but it is up to driver to check that the level is appropriate, and if he needed to, he'd fill it up. Battery connections and any cables where electric runs, you want to make sure the corrosion is removed. Make sure there's a good connection. I mentioned earlier about the defroster and the heater fan. Make sure that they're operable and that you're blowing heat. Heat is a requirement. Ironically, air conditioning is not a DOT requirement, but you could go as far as to say that the fan should work. So, but heat is a DOT requirement. And the last thing we want to check is make sure we have enough fuel. And again, that falls into the fact that you do not want to be stuck on I-90 in Buffalo, New York, running out of fuel with the temperature dropping and the snow level rising. Not a good spot to be in. So always check your fuel level. There's another slide coming up with a little handout that we send out to all our integrated fleets along with our national lease customers, and I'll run through those in a minute. And I mentioned this is the in-route inspection. So these are the pictures, or this is the picture that I thought was very telling. If you look up at the top, you see the tanker. I doubt if anyone could tell me if he was going to make a right or a left turn, if he has a license plate on his truck, if he has any DOT tape other than right there at the very bottom. Bad situation to be in. Obviously, it's a high-speed interstate. Somebody come running up on the back of this guy and they never saw a thing until they run into the back of him. So this is where that in-route inspection would be critical. You need to stop within that earlier criteria that I mentioned, get out, realize that snow's covering it, wipe off your blinker, wipe off your lenses, make sure they're cleaned off. If you notice down the yellow, nice little thing, LED lights are a great addition to the family, shall we say. They're great lights, they give you a nice bright light, but they do not create enough heat to melt the snow off of the lights, as incandescent lights have done in the past. So, I mean, LEDs are great, they last forever, they give you a nice, clean, clear light, but they're not gonna melt that snow off. So You know, a couple bullet points down there. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. I think the picture speaks for itself on that one. So the en route, you know, you want to double check your tires, make sure that you haven't gotten a flat tire along the way. Continue to check your lights, make sure they're all working. I know our 7-way electrical cords sometimes get loose. Sometimes the connection isn't that good. Check your brakes, make sure that nothing's frozen up since you've left last. And then your connections, check your air lines, make sure they're not rubbing, chafing. Check your 7-way connector, your electrical cord. And also it doesn't hurt to take another look at that fifth wheel. I know you may have driven 200 miles and the trailer's still attached, but it never hurts to take a look at that fifth wheel. A lot of things happen along the road. Okay, and here we go on the post trip. So you made it back safely. You've completed your mission at the end of the day. Now it's almost time to go home. You want to take a quick walk around. So again, we're going to check the lights, flashers, high beams, low beams. We mentioned earlier, checking the tread depth on the steer tire and the drive tires. Now, if you're wearing down more than a couple 30 seconds in the course of a day, you have some way bigger problems than doing your post-trip inspection. But we're looking for adequate tread depth at that point. Again, your windshield wiper blades, windshield washer fluid, coolant level, battery connections, defroster, and fuel level. So very similar things. Again, you're not going to go into necessarily as deep as a detail as you would on the pre-trip, but that would be the post-trip inspection. All right, defensive driving on the road. So what are some of the defensive driving techniques that we can use? You want to recognize that hazardous conditions exist. Obviously, if you look around as you're traveling, you can look and notice that the guy next to you probably doesn't realize he's in a snowstorm just by what he's doing. So, you know, keep an eye on him, and hopefully our fleets or our drivers will look and realize that they're in a hazardous condition. Anticipate other drivers' movements. I lost track of how many times I've mentioned that today. Got to keep an eye on other drivers. Allow for the mistakes of others, leaving extra space. How many times there may be some of you out there in your fleets that we have to drive for other people. It's a common refrain amongst truck drivers. We're driving for them. They don't know how poorly they are driving, so we're going to help them out. We're going to leave them some extra space and help make their life a little easier. You want to scan 15 seconds or more in front of your vehicle. That should be a given, regardless rain, snow, sleet, ice. You want to be looking at least 15 seconds ahead. Use of your mirrors every 5 to 8 seconds. That'll give you a chance to see what's around you, see what's possibly coming up from behind you. It also helps if you physically get into the motion of moving your head when you're looking around. It helps to keep you awake, maybe fatigue's beginning to set in. So you may want to take advantage of that little technique. Adjusting your speed and movements to road conditions. Again, that goes back to my earlier mention of making a nice slow transition on lane changes. If you're going to apply your brakes, you want nice gradual application, no stare braking or snub braking. And then something that I thought everyone kind of understood, and over the years I've come to realize that especially newer drivers, they don't realize that the use of the cruise control, the engine brake, it's basically a mechanical device. It does not know it's snowing, it does not know it's raining, it does not know that there's ice on the ground. If you leave the cruise or the engine brake engaged, it could cause you to lose control of the vehicle. If you go into some of your manuals, if you've ever looked into the new manuals of the vehicles, the Freightliners, Volvos, Internationals, they all mention that do not use the cruise control or engine brake during inclement weather. So you might want to pass that on to your fleet or your drivers. This next one, just a couple, hopefully the color comparison and the arrows will help to represent a little bit better of what we need to see. So under normal or dry road conditions with 6-second following distance, that's about how much time you would need. It's just a graphical representation. Winter driving, you want to look for 8 or 9 or more seconds to allow for the proper following distance. Now, stopping distance, here we get a little iffy. You get into rain and you need about 50% more than dry distance to come to a stop. So if you can see that's in yellow, I about doubled the distance from the green arrow. So you want to try to add double that. Under snow, you're looking for 2 times the normal stopping distance. And I'm hoping that that red snow arrow will kind of represent almost doubling your normal. And ice, you're looking at 3 times. So those are kind of a graphical representation of increasing your following distance, because your stopping distance will increase accordingly depending on what type of road you're on. So let's come up with a little acronym. We want to maintain space. So let's use SPACE as our acronym. So speed, the #1 cause of winter driving accidents is driving too fast. I mentioned that, one of the first items I mentioned. Patience. Oh, something that's in short supply anymore in today's fast-paced world. Patience, it's a learned art. You just have to learn to have patience. Nothing good comes from rushing. Courtesy, I am a tremendous proponent of being courteous on the road to other four-wheelers or cars. If people flash me in, if they slide over for me, I try to use my lights to indicate that I'm saying thank you to the best that I can. It just helps. It helps the industry as a whole to look better, and I can't see how it would hurt. So I'm a huge fan of courtesy when I'm with my drivers on ride-alongs, and also patience in general. Awareness, I mentioned that a number of times. Awareness of other vehicles and your environment in and of itself is essential. If you're not aware, you're going to be caught by surprise, and sooner or later that's going to catch up to you. Concentration. The increased hazards of winter driving make this important. We put more concentration, the more hazardous the situation becomes, the more we begin to concentrate. So, you want to recognize that. Try not to concentrate too much. Don't get that focused view where you're staring down the barrel of a gun straight ahead. You want to try to keep that 180 degrees of peripheral vision available to you so that you can see things around you. And something that you should talk to yourself about as you drive, in addition to your fleet and any drivers, where are you going to go if something goes south in front of me? There is no exact answer. Because like I mentioned earlier, every foot of the roadway you travel changes. But you should always be asking yourself, where would I go if this person spun out, if this person unexpectedly stopped? Again, no exact answer, but if you continually ask yourself that, you'll be better prepared to avoid that situation were it to occur. So let's touch base on some injury prevention real quick and the drivers themselves. Gentleman up there on the left seems to have hurt his elbow maybe or forearm. Gentleman in the upper right corner looks like a knee problem. Gentleman down the lower left looks like his wrist, something's going on there. And the one on the lower right, that gentleman has a fellow worker. He's probably calling 911 to assist in him, and that's a railroad worker actually. And then that picture in the upper middle, the gentleman with the neck brace and the arm sling talking to someone in a suit, is probably not the spot we want to be in as a company. I'll just leave that to your imagination where that conversation is going, but we don't want to be part of that. So we want to try to help our drivers be safe, and anybody in our entire organization, we don't want them to get injured. One of the biggest causes of injuries in probably the transportation industry and others is not using the 3 points of contact. If you do that properly, you'll eliminate potential slip and fall injuries. This is a truck driver. This could apply to anything. You could be in your office, walking up steps, not holding onto the handrail, walking down a hallway, going into a doorway with a step or two where you need to go up. You want to try to have 3 points of contact at all times. One thing from a truck driver perspective, I've seen my fair share of drivers getting out of the truck face first. They are using 3 points of contact, and they thought they were doing it properly, and we have to kind of politely explain to them that you want to be facing in towards the vehicle when you exit and when you enter the vehicle. So that picture is a perfect representation of what we need to see. Another item, failing to wear a seatbelt while operating a commercial motor vehicle. Just threw in a quick little blurb on CSA impact here. The CSA impact for not wearing your seatbelt is 7 points. Keep that in the back of your mind with a multiplier of 3. That'll give you 21 points. A company profile, that's going to last for 2 years. On a driver profile, that's going to be a 3-year look back. So again, make sure that your drivers are wearing their seatbelts. Make sure they're wearing them properly. Also, another thing that we've run into over time, not that often, but once in a great while, our drivers will be DOT'd and the officer will say that he was not wearing his seatbelt when he walked up on the driver. Ironically, the driver took the belt off to reach over and get his permit book, his registration, insurance card, things of that nature. We highly recommend to our drivers that you do not unbuckle your seatbelt until the officer sees that you've had it on. Because if he decides to write you for it, chances are you are not going to win that particular battle. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Footwear. Huge proponent of any type of industrial type of environment that we're in, but even more important when the snow and the ice comes. So footwear, you want to be wearing a work type footwear if that's what you mandate at your account, steel toes. If that is what you require, then that should be what's worn. You want to make sure that the sole of the footwear itself is in good condition. Make sure there's proper tread. Traction aids if required. I put this in there. It is an option. It is available. We do not currently take advantage of that because of the type of operation that we run, multiple deliveries throughout the course of the day. Not to say it wouldn't be applicable in some other applications, but I just thought I'd put it out there as an FYI. Again, I mentioned work type footwear. Everybody's idea is a little different of what work type footwear. I'm sure there's a gentleman in the snow belt right now wearing flip-flops that thought that that was the proper footwear. And then insulated and/or waterproof, good recommendation, but I guess you couldn't mandate it necessarily, but I know if it was cold, I'd want to have some insulated boots on and preferably waterproof. Proper clothing, if you look to the left, I put a little more for construction gear, but it fits us perfectly. Proper clothing, wear at least 3 layers. That way you can remove the layers as you begin to heat up. That outer layer should be able to deflect the wind or the rain or the snow. Use of a hat and a hood are a good idea. And insulated gloves. I know some drivers aren't real comfortable wearing gloves. Again, unless they're mandated. I know in the oil fields they are in particular circumstances, but don't know why you wouldn't want to wear insulated gloves in a cold weather environment. Preventing cold stress injuries. So a loose definition would be anyone working outside may be at risk of cold stress. So some of the risk factors, wetness or dampness. We lose a tremendous amount of body heat in water. That's why hypothermia is a huge proponent of deaths when they fall into water in the river, lakes, the ocean. The moisture just pulls the heat out of your body exponentially larger than anything else. Dressing improperly, again, we mentioned earlier, 3 layers of clothing, insulated gloves, hood, things of that nature. Exhaustion does come into play. Hopefully none of the people that we're dealing with on today's webinar have any employees that are at the point of exhaustion doing their job. Health conditions. I just put it on there as a general concern. Obviously, each one of you will know exactly what your particular employees are suffering from that may make cold stress a little bit more prominent. And then poor physical conditioning, and it goes without saying, I mean, in life in general, the better condition you're in, the better you'll be able to stand up to some cold stress situations. So if you've implemented a wellness program in your company, which we offer at AIM for our employees, it's a great benefit to have. I think as people become older and the younger generation is coming up, more and more people are looking for that type of availability. So. I mentioned in the beginning about a little handout that we send out. It's probably I don't know, 4x5 little card that we have on all of our shops. Just some things you'd want to do from a national lease customer with rental trucks. Starting equipment, you don't want to crank your engine for more than 15 seconds. After more than 3 attempts, you want to get a hold of our shops. The engine heater, if your truck is available with an engine heater, you should use it in cold weather. Make sure you plug it in while it's still warm at the end of the day. Air tanks, you want to make sure you pull your lanyards to drain any excess moisture out of those tanks. That moisture gets into your lines freeze, and guess what? That delivery that needed to be there is not going to be there on time. If you get fuel at any of our AIM shops, our AIM fuel is blended with an additive. If you were to get them at some of the larger shops, and I'm not recommending, but just mentioning, I'm sure we're all familiar, Pilot, TA, Flying J, Petros, they go through so much fuel. It's a good turnover, and they do add the additive if it's needed in a particular areas. And then any warning lights. Obviously, at today's newer engine, lights are going on all the time, those dash lights. You got a malfunctioning indicator lamp, you got a check engine light. Make sure you get with the maintenance department, if you are a customer. And if you're under your own fleet, you want to have those looked at. Do not let them keep running. It just makes the problem much worse to try to correct. So we could whittle this down into any number of letters. I've chosen the 3 Ps of safe winter driving. So maybe some of the key takeaways of it would be preparing for the trip. I mentioned a number of things throughout the webinar to prepare for your trip. Secondly, prevent motor vehicle accidents. Doesn't necessarily pertain to winter driving, pertains to driving in general, but not a bad P to have in there. And then protect yourself, and that's, the use of the seatbelt, use of proper clothing, just in general, your awareness, your general well-being. So we want to look at the 3 Ps of safe winter driving and apply them to our overall life throughout our daily day. So I'd done a webinar, I think back in September, October. I had this at the end of my webinar. I kind of like it. I might try to make it part of it. But I mean, one of the things that I kind of believe that if you don't have the knowledge, then you're in big trouble. You need the knowledge, and that's kind of what we're helping you do with the webinar, passing on the knowledge that we have. Granted, some of it you may have known already. Maybe you picked up an item or two from this that you can move forward to and improve your fleets and drivers. It's one thing, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're not aware of what's going on or how to use it, it's not doing you much good. So I want to try to make the drivers aware of what knowledge I'm giving them when I do safety meetings and I do meetings with customers. And then we want to take action on what to do. Wear the proper clothes, wear the proper boots, drive the proper way, take action on those other 2 items. And the last one is, ironically, we want to try to prevent any problems from occurring. So if you do those 3 items at the top, the prevention part kind of falls into place on its own. And I'd like to think that if you can do all 4 of those and be successful, that would equal success in your fleets, amongst your drivers, and even with yourself. So this last slide, questions or comments. I think Jess is going to open up the floor. If you have anything, put it out there. I'd be more than happy to try to help you out. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask through the use of email, feel free to hit me up on my email address at the bottom down there. And my phone number is right below it. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. And as always, it's been a pleasure. I can't wait to do the next one.
Thank you, John. That was fantastic. If anyone has any questions for John right now, he'll answer them to the group. You guys can either unmute yourself and ask them verbally, or you can type them into the chat function in the bottom middle of your screen. So questions for John? Any questions? All right, John, I got one that came across the chat. Let me see. It says, what is the best way to determine if there is black ice on the road?
It's a great question. Some things that truck drivers have passed down through the years. Look at other vehicles' tires. Look in your mirrors at your own tires. If you see a spray coming up from the tires, that's a good indication that there's still moisture on the roadway and that you aren't experiencing black ice at that point. Sound can be another thing. The sound will actually change. You won't hear the sound of the road, the concrete or the asphalt underneath of you. It's something that as you drive more and more, you'll begin to notice it. Maybe if you're not a driver, it wouldn't be something you'd necessarily notice, but that is another indicator. The sound would change. It would get quieter because you're basically driving on a sheet of ice. There'll be no friction. So those are two very, very common things that we look for from a truck driving perspective. Not to say that there aren't others, but those seem to be the ones that recur time over time when I talk to drivers or read articles about that.
Okay, thank you, John. All right, I had another one that popped up on the chat. What is the most important component of a successful safety culture in a company?
Wow.
That's a tough one.
Good question. Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny, we're working on one right now for ourselves. I don't know if you can whittle it down to one thing. I mean, commitment from the company, I think might be a big one. If you don't have buy-in from the company, it's a little difficult to get started. Starting at the top. I hate it. It sounds flip, but really it's got to start from the top. If it doesn't start from the top, it's very difficult to build the culture. And that's where we're starting with AIM. We've been that way for years, but we're putting more emphasis on it this year. So I think commitment might be a big start. We could throw in others, what we're going to call pillars of support: integrity, trust, accountability.
I agree. I think that was very well said. And it's just, keep constant reminders. The second you turn your back, then that's when something occurs. So it's just, keep it always in the forefront of the culture.
Yep.
I got another question. This is from Frank. And will this presentation be available to us? That is a great question. Yes. So once this video buffers, it'll take about an hour. I'll send out a link to the video along with a PDF version of John's slide deck here to everyone who participated in the webinar today. We encourage you guys to share this with your drivers and anyone else at your company that this information is relevant to. That email will have John's contact information along with my contact information on it. If you have any questions about anything that we went over today, John's obviously a fantastic resource for anything safety related, and he's always happy to help. If you're already an AIM customer, John or one of his peers, they conduct in-house safety meetings where they'd come in and do safety training on an individual basis with your drivers as well. That's one of the value-added services that you get with an AIM full service lease. One more question. How much slower do you recommend going during winter conditions? Below the speed limit question?
Another good question. It's difficult. I think you don't want to be the person that is causing accidents. So from a truck driving perspective, we have to be out there. We are delivering. We're going through Buffalo, and now we've hit slow traffic and weather. It's really up to the driver to decide when he feels it's unsafe enough that he should pull over and stop. I don't know if there's a definitive number. We could place a definitive number on it today, but again, every situation is different. If it gets to the point where you, the driver, become a hazard himself by going too slow, that would be a great indicator for me that it's time for you to pull over. You end up becoming part of the problem at that point. As far as how much slower, I don't have an answer for you. I don't know if anybody could truly say, I'm going to slow down from 60 to 30. To me, that would be, you are becoming a hazard that you're trying to avoid at doing 30 miles an hour in a 60 mile an hour zone. In a 30 mile an hour zone, slowing to 20, I think that would be more reasonable. Maybe in a residential suburban type of setting. Interstate driving, speed limit of 70. You know, many states, I'm pretty sure California, you're not even allowed to put flashers on at a low speed. I'm sure we've all seen the signs on the interstate, you know, minimum speed 45 miles an hour. So if you find yourself doing 44 miles an hour on I-90 in Buffalo in a snowstorm, you know, might be a chance for you to try to get off the road. Now, granted, it might be difficult. That's the reason you're going slow, is because of heavy snow. Again, it's not an exact science. I'm sure we're all familiar with it. We try to make the best decisions we can by being educated. So I hope that answered your question.
I think that was a great answer, John. Any other questions? All right, well, once again, I'll be sending you guys out a link to the video along with a copy of John's slides. That might actually end up coming tomorrow morning, depending on how long it takes for the video to come through. But please keep an eye out for invitations to future webinars. As John mentioned, we host one of these a month, and they're all topics that are relatable to anyone who is involved in the transportation community. A lot of them are safety related, so you will see John's face again as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, John.
My pleasure.
All right, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, John.